The storm outside Sinclair Manor that October evening was nothing compared to the chaos brewing inside. Elena Martinez, 27 years old with tired eyes and work-worn hands, pushed her cleaning cart through the marble hallways, moving like a ghost through spaces where she barely existed to the wealthy residents. Rain hammered the windows while thunder shook the foundations of the massive estate. She had worked here for 3 years, invisible, silent, observing everything while being noticed by no one. Alexander Sinclair, 34, heir to a technology empire worth billions, was supposed to marry Victoria Ashworth in exactly 2 weeks. Victoria, 29, was everything society demanded: beautiful, sophisticated, connected to old money and new power. Their engagement photos had graced every magazine cover, the perfect couple with perfect smiles. But Elena had seen the truth behind those smiles. She had witnessed the coldness in Victoria's eyes when she looked at Alexander, the calculating way she touched his arm, the cruel edge to her laughter when she thought no servants were listening. That evening, Elena was cleaning the East Wing when she heard voices rising from the private study. She should have walked away, should have minded her business as she had been taught. But something in Alexander's voice, a desperation she had never heard before, made her freeze in place. "This is just business, Alexander. It's always been business." Victoria's voice cut through the door like ice. "You have money and power. I have connections and ambition. Together we're unstoppable. Stop being so sentimental about love." "I thought we had something real," Alexander replied, his voice breaking. "I thought you cared about me, not just what I could give you." Victoria's laugh was cruel. "Care about you? Darling, I care about your net worth, your properties, your company shares. Once we're married, half of everything becomes mine. That's what I care about. And if you think you can back out now, think again. I have documents, evidence of your company's questionable overseas deals. One phone call, and you'll spend the next decade in prison." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. This wasn't just a cold engagement. This was blackmail, manipulation, something dark and dangerous. "You're threatening me?" Alexander asked quietly. "I'm insuring my investment," Victoria replied smoothly. "And if you try to run or cancel this wedding, I've made other arrangements. You'll disappear for a few days, just long enough for me to convince everyone you've had a breakdown. By the time you resurface, we'll already be married, and I'll have legal control of everything. My associates are very good at making people disappear, Alexander. Don't test me." The door burst open and Alexander strode out, his face pale, his hands shaking. He didn't see Elena standing in the shadows. Victoria followed, already on her phone, speaking in low, threatening tones to someone on the other end. Elena's instincts screamed at her. She had grown up poor, had survived things that taught her to recognize real danger when she saw it. Victoria wasn't bluffing. She was planning something terrible, and it was going to happen soon. For the rest of her shift, Elena couldn't focus. She went through the motions of cleaning, but her mind raced. She watched Alexander through windows and doorways, saw him pacing his room, saw the defeat in his shoulders. Here was a man who had everything, yet was more trapped than she had ever been in her poverty. Around midnight, Elena saw them. 3 men in dark clothes moving through the hallways with lethal purpose. They weren't security guards. She knew every security guard in the manor. These men moved like hunters, and one of them carried something that gleamed in the dim light. A syringe. Another had rope coiled over his shoulder. Terror shot through her. They were going to take him. Tonight. Victoria wasn't waiting for the wedding. She was going to kidnap Alexander, probably drug him, hold him somewhere until she could force the marriage through or gain control of his assets. Elena didn't think. She ran through the servant passages, the hidden corridors she knew better than anyone. She burst into Alexander's room through the connecting door, startling him from his chair by the fireplace. "Mr. Sinclair," she gasped, "you have to come with me right now. Your life is in danger." He stared at her, confusion and surprise crossing his face. "Elena? What are you talking about?" "Victoria sent men. They're coming to take you. They have drugs, rope. I heard her earlier threatening you. Please, sir, you have to trust me. We have seconds." The sound of footsteps in the main hallway made the decision for him. Alexander looked at the door, then at Elena's desperate, honest face. Something in her eyes convinced him. He grabbed his phone and wallet and followed her into the servants' passage, pulling the panel shut just as his bedroom door burst open behind them. Elena led him through the maze of narrow corridors, down steep stairs meant for servants, through the old parts of the house that the wealthy never saw. They could hear shouts behind them, footsteps pounding, Victoria's voice screaming orders. They ran through the kitchen, past the laundry rooms, into the oldest part of the manor where the original servant quarters stood. Elena's room was tiny, barely 12 feet by 10 feet, tucked in the corner of the old wing. A narrow bed, a small dresser, a single window that looked out onto the servants' courtyard. She pushed Alexander inside and locked the heavy wooden door, throwing the old iron bolt that had been there for 100 years. "What is this place?" Alexander asked, breathing hard, looking around at the cramped space that was smaller than his walk-in closet. "My room," Elena said quietly. "No one comes here except servants, and the other staff are gone for the night. You'll be safe here." They stood in the dim light of her single lamp, the storm still raging outside, both of them trying to catch their breath. Alexander looked at this young woman who had just saved his life, this maid he had barely noticed in 3 years, and something shifted in his chest. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly. Elena met his eyes. "Because it was right. Because everyone deserves to be free, even billionaires." Outside, they could hear searching, voices calling, footsteps in distant hallways. Victoria's fury echoed through the walls. But here, in this tiny servant's room, Alexander Sinclair was safe. And for the first time in months, he could breathe without the weight of manipulation crushing his chest. Elena moved to the door and checked the lock again. "You'll have to stay here for a few days," she whispered, "until we figure out what to do. Until you're safe. I'll bring you food and water. But you have to stay hidden. You have to stay quiet. Can you do that?" Alexander looked at this brave young woman who was risking everything for him and nodded. "Yes. Thank you, Elena. Thank you for saving my life." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Rest now. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next step." That night, while Victoria tore the manor apart looking for him, while security guards searched every room and her hired men scoured the grounds, Alexander Sinclair slept on a thin mattress in a maid's tiny room, safer than he had been in years. Morning light filtered through the single small window of Elena's room, and Alexander woke to unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, confusion clouded his mind. The ceiling was low, the walls bare except for a small crucifix and a faded photograph of an elderly woman. Then reality crashed back. Victoria, the threats, the men who had come for him, Elena's desperate rescue. He sat up on the narrow bed, his body aching from the uncomfortable mattress, so different from his king-sized bed with its expensive linens. Elena was gone, but she had left a note on the small dresser. "Stay quiet. Stay away from the window. I'll bring breakfast soon. Trust no one." Alexander stood and examined the room that had become his sanctuary. It was painfully small, perhaps a quarter the size of his bathroom. Everything Elena owned fit in this tiny space. A few clothes hung in a narrow closet. Books were stacked on the floor, well-worn paperbacks with Spanish and English titles. A small electric kettle sat on the dresser next to a jar of instant coffee. This was her entire world, and she had given it up to protect him. Voices outside made him freeze. He pressed himself against the wall beside the window, listening. "Search every room again." Victoria's voice carried through the courtyard. She sounded furious, desperate. He couldn't have just vanished. Someone is hiding him. Question every servant. I want answers. Miss Ashworth, we've searched everywhere, a man's voice replied. He's not in the manor. Then search the grounds again. The stables, the guest houses, the gardens. Tear this entire estate apart if you have to. And increase the security at every exit. If he tries to leave, I want to know immediately. Alexander's hands clenched into fists. The woman he had planned to marry, the woman he had trusted, was hunting him like an animal. How had he been so blind? How had he mistaken her calculated charm for genuine affection? The door lock clicked softly, and Elena slipped inside, carrying a tray covered with a cloth. She locked the door quickly behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. Are you all right? Alexander asked quietly. Elena nodded, moving to set the tray on the dresser. Victoria is questioning everyone. She's offering money for information. The staff is scared. She uncovered the tray, revealing toast, eggs, fruit, and coffee. I told them I was taking breakfast to Mrs. Chan in the laundry room. She's covering for me. Elena, you're risking your job. Maybe worse. If Victoria finds out you're helping me, then I'll deal with it. Elena interrupted gently.
Eat.
You need your strength. They sat together in the cramped space, Alexander on the bed and Elena on the floor with her back against the dresser. It felt surreal, a billionaire and a maid hiding in a servant's quarters while the world searched for him outside. But there was something honest about it, something real that Alexander had been missing for years. Tell me about her, Elena said quietly. Victoria. How did you meet? Alexander sighed, picking at his food. At a charity gala 2 years ago. She was brilliant, charming, seemed to understand my world. We started dating and it felt easy. She knew the right people, said the right things, fit perfectly into my life. 6 months ago, I proposed because it seemed like the logical next step. Everyone approved. My board of directors loved her. My attorneys thought she was perfect. But you didn't love her, Elena said softly. Alexander looked at her, surprised by her directness. No, he admitted. I thought I did, or I thought I could learn to. But it was never real, was it? She saw a fortune, a name, a useful tool. I was so lonely that I mistook attention for affection. Elena's eyes were compassionate. Loneliness makes us accept things we shouldn't. I understand that. Tell me about you, Alexander said. How did you end up here? Elena smiled sadly. I came from Mexico 5 years ago. My mother got sick, needed expensive treatments. I sent money home every month. This job pays well, better than most for someone without papers, without education. Mrs. Ashworth, your head housekeeper, took a chance on me. I've been here ever since, invisible but grateful. You're not invisible, Alexander said. Not to me. Not anymore. The hours passed slowly in that small room. Elena had to leave periodically to continue her work, to avoid suspicion, but she returned whenever she could, bringing water, updates, comfort. Each time she entered, Alexander felt a strange sense of relief, as if her presence made the tiny room feel less like a prison and more like a refuge. In the afternoon, Elena returned looking worried. Victoria called the police. She's reported you missing, said you've been acting strange, that she's worried about your mental health. She's playing the concerned fiancé perfectly. Of course she is, Alexander said bitterly. That's her plan. Make everyone think I've had a breakdown, that I'm not in my right mind. Then when she produces me, drugged and confused, no one will question her taking control. We need to think of a plan, Elena said, sitting beside him on the narrow bed. You can't hide here forever. Eventually, someone will find you, or Victoria will give up and do something worse. They talked for hours, their voices low, planning, strategizing. The small room seemed to shrink around them, but instead of feeling claustrophobic, it felt intimate, safe. Alexander found himself watching Elena as she spoke, noticing things he had never seen before. The determination in her eyes, the way she gestured with her hands when she was thinking, the strength that radiated from someone who had survived things he couldn't imagine. Why are you really doing this? He asked suddenly. You could lose everything. Your job, your income, your ability to help your mother. Why risk it all for someone you barely know? Elena was quiet for a long moment. When I was 15, my father was accused of stealing from the ranch where he worked. He didn't do it, but the owner's son had done the stealing and blamed my father. No one believed us. We were poor, powerless. My father went to prison for 2 years for a crime he didn't commit. I watched him break under the weight of injustice, of being trapped by lies from someone more powerful. She looked at Alexander, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I saw you walking through these halls for 3 years, and even though you had everything, you looked just as trapped as my father did. When I heard Victoria threaten you, when I saw those men coming for you, I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't let someone powerful destroy someone else just because they could. Alexander felt something crack open in his chest, something he had kept locked away for years. Elena, he whispered, reaching for her hand. I'm so sorry that happened to your father. And I'm so grateful you saw me, really saw me, when everyone else just saw a fortune and a name. Their hands intertwined, and they sat in silence as the afternoon sun moved across the small room. Outside, the search continued. Victoria's voice occasionally pierced through the walls, growing more frustrated, more desperate. But inside this tiny sanctuary, 2 people from completely different worlds found an unexpected connection, an understanding that transcended wealth and status. As evening approached, Elena prepared to leave for her dinner shift. I'll bring you food after the evening service, she promised. Try to rest. Try not to worry. Elena, Alexander called as she reached the door. She turned back. Thank you. For seeing me. For saving me. For being brave when I couldn't be. She smiled, a real smile that lit up her tired face. We save each other, Mr. Sinclair. That's what people do when they care. After she left, Alexander lay back on the narrow bed, his mind spinning. He had spent years in boardrooms and mansions, surrounded by luxury and power, yet he had never felt as safe or as seen as he did in this tiny servant's room with a woman who had nothing but her courage and her compassion. The first day of hiding ended with Alexander understanding something profound. Freedom wasn't about money or power. It was about being seen for who you truly were and being accepted anyway. And somehow, in the most unlikely place, with the most unlikely person, he had found exactly that. The second morning in Elena's room began with muffled chaos from outside. Alexander woke to the sound of footsteps, dozens of them, moving through corridors and rooms. Through the thin walls, he could hear Victoria's voice, sharper now, edged with panic. Expand the search beyond the estate, she commanded. Check the hospitals, the airports, the hotels. Someone must have seen him. And you, her voice grew venomous, question the servants again. Someone knows something. I can feel it. Alexander pressed himself against the wall, hardly breathing. The small rooms suddenly felt even smaller, the walls closing in. His phone had died hours ago, cutting him off from everything except this tiny space and the woman who had become his only lifeline. Elena arrived early, before dawn, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had worked a double shift to avoid suspicion, cleaning rooms and serving meals while hiding her secret. She brought breakfast, but also news that made Alexander's blood run cold. "Victoria called your lawyer and your doctor," Elena whispered as she set down the tray. "She's trying to have you declared mentally incompetent. She's telling everyone you've been unstable, depressed, talking about running away. She has people willing to testify to things that never happened. If she succeeds, she'll have legal guardianship, control of everything." "My God," Alexander breathed. "She's thought of everything." "Not everything," Elena said firmly. "She hasn't found you. And as long as you're hidden, she can't complete her plan." But the strain was showing on both of them. The room was too small for pacing, too confining for the anxiety that built with each passing hour. Alexander tried to stay calm, tried to think strategically about his next move, but fear kept creeping in. What if they were caught? What would Victoria do to Elena? As the morning wore on, they found themselves sitting close together on the narrow bed, the only furniture that could seat two people in the cramped space. Elena had brought her mother's rosary, the beads moving through her fingers in a rhythm that seemed to calm her. Alexander watched, fascinated by this glimpse into her private world. "Tell me about your mother," he said quietly. "You send money home for her treatments. What's wrong?" Elena's fingers paused on the beads.
"Cancer."
"It started 3 years ago, just before I got this job. The treatments in Mexico are expensive, but less expensive than here. My brother lives with her, takes care of her. Every month I send what I can. It's not enough, it's never enough, but it's something." "And your father?" "The one who was wrongly imprisoned. He died 2 years after he was released," Elena said softly. "His heart gave out. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but I think it was a broken spirit. He never recovered from the injustice, from knowing he'd lost 2 years of his life for someone else's crime. He died still trying to clear his name." Alexander felt shame wash over him. While he had been complaining about the pressures of wealth, about difficult board meetings and social obligations, Elena had been carrying the weight of her family's survival on her shoulders. She worked in his house, cleaned his rooms, and he had never once really seen her, never wondered about her story. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately. "For your father, for your mother, for not seeing you before now." Elena looked at him, her dark eyes understanding. "You couldn't see me. Our worlds weren't supposed to touch. I was hired to be invisible, to serve without being noticed. That's how it works." "It's wrong," Alexander said with sudden passion. "All of it is wrong. The way we live in our separate worlds, the way wealth makes some people visible and others invisible. You're worth 100 Victorias, 1,000 of the people I call friends. You're brave and kind and strong, and you've been invisible because of an accident of birth, because of lines on a map and papers you don't have." Elena smiled sadly. "The world doesn't work on kindness and bravery, Mr. Sinclair. It works on money and power. You know that." "Call me Alexander," he said.
"Please."
"Here, in this room, can we forget about the world outside? Can we just be two people trying to survive?" "Alexander," she repeated, testing his name. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that broke all the rules she had lived by. The hours passed slowly. They talked about everything and nothing. Alexander told her about growing up wealthy but lonely, about parents who saw him as a legacy to manage rather than a child to love, about boarding schools and business expectations and the crushing weight of becoming someone he never wanted to be. Elena shared stories of her childhood in a small Mexican village, of poverty but also community, of struggle but also joy, of a family that had nothing but gave everything to each other. In the afternoon, the small room grew warm. Sweat beaded on their foreheads in the confined space. Elena opened the window slightly, just enough for air, but not enough to be noticed. They could hear the sounds of the estate, the search continuing, Victoria's frustration mounting. "What will you do?" Elena asked. "When this is over? When you're safe?" Alexander was quiet for a long time. "I've been thinking about that. For years I've been running a company I inherited, living a life that was chosen for me before I was born. I've never asked myself what I actually want." He looked at her. "These 2 days, hiding in this tiny room, have been the most honest days of my life. Does that sound crazy?" "No," Elena said. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what matters." As evening approached, Elena had to leave again for her shift. But this time, Alexander caught her hand before she could go. "Elena," he said urgently, "if something happens, if Victoria finds out you've been helping me, I want you to know that I'll protect you. I'll make sure you're safe, that your mother gets care, that you never have to worry about money again." "You don't owe me anything," Elena protested. "This isn't about debt," Alexander said. "It's about caring. You've cared for me when no one else would. Let me care for you too." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not for me, but for you. Victoria is dangerous. She's not going to stop." "I know," Alexander said. "But I'm not alone anymore. I have you." After Elena left, Alexander sat in the growing darkness of the small room, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. 2 days ago, he had been a billionaire on the verge of a society wedding, trapped in a life of manipulation and lies. Now he was a fugitive hiding in a maid's quarters, but somehow he felt more free than he had in years. The room was tiny, the circumstances were dire, but here, with Elena, he felt seen, valued, understood in a way that no amount of wealth had ever provided. That night, when Elena returned with dinner, they sat together on the floor, sharing simple food and talking in whispers. The closeness of the space meant their shoulders touched, their hands occasionally brushed. Neither pulled away. The connection between them was growing, undeniable and unexpected, crossing every boundary that society had placed between them. "Thank you," Alexander whispered as the night deepened, "for giving me this space, for giving me time to think, to breathe, to be myself." "Thank you," Elena whispered back, "for trusting me, for seeing me as more than just a servant." In that small room, as the second day of hiding drew to a close, 2 people from opposite worlds discovered something that transcended wealth and status, the profound connection of 2 souls who recognized each other's pain, each other's strength, each other's humanity. And in that recognition, something beautiful and impossible began to bloom. The third morning brought a shift in atmosphere, a tension that crackled through the walls of the small servant's room. Alexander woke to find Elena already there, sitting on the floor with her back against the door, her face pale and drawn. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, sitting up. "Victoria found the security footage," Elena whispered, "from the night you disappeared. She saw us going into the servants' passages. She doesn't know exactly where you are yet, but she knows someone helped you. She's questioning the staff one by one, threatening to fire everyone if they don't talk." Alexander's heart sank. "You have to distance yourself from me. Tell them you don't know anything. I'll leave. I'll figure something out." "No," Elena said firmly. "We're past that point. If you leave now, they'll catch you immediately. Victoria has people watching every exit, every road. Your only chance is to stay hidden until we can get you help from someone you trust. I can't let you lose your job, your income, everything you've worked for, Alexander protested. And I can't let you be kidnapped and manipulated by that woman, Elena countered. We're in this together now. The morning was tense, every sound from outside making them both freeze. Elena had to leave for her morning duties to maintain the appearance of normalcy, but Alexander could see the fear in her eyes. She was putting everything on the line for him, and the weight of that sacrifice pressed down on his chest. Alone in the small room, Alexander used the last battery life on his phone to send a carefully worded message to his most trusted attorney, Marcus Chen, who had worked with Alexander's family for decades. The message was cryptic but urgent. In danger. Victoria is threat. Needs secure extraction. Trust no one else. He had to hope Marcus would understand, would act discreetly, would help without alerting Victoria. The afternoon brought a new development. Elena returned during her lunch break, her hands shaking as she locked the door behind her. Victoria is offering $50,000 to anyone who provides information about your location, she said, her voice trembling. People are searching everywhere, checking every corner of the estate. Mrs. Chen, the woman who's been covering for me, just told me that Victoria suspects the servants' quarters. They're going to search here, maybe as soon as tonight. Alexander stood, his mind racing. The tiny room that had been their sanctuary for 3 days was about to become a trap. We need a plan. We need to move, or we need to trust each other completely, Elena interrupted. She pulled out her phone, showing him a message. Your attorney, Marcus Chen, just contacted me through the staff directory. He says he received your message. He's arranging safe transport, but it will take time. He needs you to hold on for one more day. How did he know to contact you? Alexander asked. I don't know. Maybe he's been investigating. Maybe he figured out who would be brave enough to help you. But he's offering to protect me too, to make sure I'm safe regardless of what happens. Elena's eyes met his. He also said something else. He said Victoria has been planning this for months, that she has documents prepared to take control of your assets, that she has people ready to testify about your supposed mental breakdown. If we don't stop her now, you'll lose everything. The gravity of the situation settled over them like a weight. They weren't just hiding anymore. They were racing against time, against a woman who had plotted and schemed and prepared for every contingency. As the afternoon shadows lengthened in the small room, Alexander and Elena sat together on the narrow bed, their shoulders touching, their hands clasped. The space that had felt so confining now felt intimate, precious, a small bubble of safety in a world that had turned hostile. Tell me something, Alexander said quietly. If we get through this, if I'm safe and you're safe, what would you do? What would you want for yourself? Elena was quiet for a long moment. I'd want to see my mother, she said finally. I'd want to hold her hand, tell her I love her, maybe be there for her in person instead of just sending money. I'd want to feel less afraid all the time, less like I'm one mistake away from losing everything. She paused, her voice catching. I'd want to matter to someone, not as a servant or a source of income, but as a person who deserves love and respect. You matter to me, Alexander said, turning to face her fully. These 3 days, you've been the bravest, most compassionate, most real person I've ever known. You've saved my life, not just from Victoria, but from the emptiness I've been living in. You've shown me what genuine caring looks like, what courage means. You matter, Elena. You matter more than you know. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what it means to hear that, she whispered. All my life, I've been invisible, disposable, someone people look through rather than at. And now you, someone from a completely different world, you see me. You really see me. I see you, Alexander confirmed, his hand reaching up to gently touch her face. I see your strength, your kindness, Your beauty that has nothing to do with money or status, and everything to do with who you are. In that moment, in that tiny room with danger closing in around them, something shifted. The barriers between them, the walls built by society and circumstance, crumbled away. Alexander leaned forward, and Elena didn't pull back. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle, tentative, full of wonder and fear and hope. When they parted, both were breathing hard, both aware that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "This is impossible," Elena whispered. "You're a billionaire. I'm a maid. The world will never accept." "I don't care about the world," Alexander interrupted. "I care about you. I care about what we've found here, in this small room, when everything else was stripped away. This is real, Elena. This is the first real thing I've felt in years." They held each other as the evening approached, knowing that soon they would have to face whatever came next. Victoria's search was intensifying. The staff was being pressured. Time was running out. But here, in this moment, they had each other. When Elena had to leave for the evening shift, the goodbye was harder than before. They both knew that tonight might be the night everything came crashing down. Alexander pulled her close one more time. "Whatever happens," he said intensely, "know that you changed my life. You showed me what freedom really means, what love really looks like. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll protect yourself first." "I promise," Elena said, though they both knew it was a lie. She would protect him first, always, because that's who she was. After she left, Alexander paced the tiny room, his mind turning over possibilities and plans. Marcus Chun was arranging extraction, but would it come in time? Would Victoria's search find them first? And what would happen to Elena when the truth came out, when everyone knew she had hidden him? That night was the longest of Alexander's life. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound, every footstep, every voice. The small room that had been a sanctuary now felt like a fragile shell, ready to crack under the pressure from outside. Around midnight, Elena returned, moving quickly and quietly. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with fear and adrenaline. "They're searching the servants' quarters tomorrow morning," she said breathlessly. "Room by room. Victoria is personally supervising. We have less than 12 hours. Alexander stood, pulling her into his arms. "Then we face it together. Whatever happens, we face it together." They spent that night awake, holding each other in the small room, two people from impossible worlds who had found something worth fighting for. Outside, Victoria's trap was closing. Inside, in that tiny space barely big enough for two, love was blooming against all odds, fragile but fierce, impossible but undeniable. As dawn approached on the third day of hiding, they knew their time was running out. The small room that had protected them was about to become ground zero in a confrontation that would change everything. But neither of them was alone anymore. And sometimes, in the darkest moments, that's all that matters. Dawn broke on what would be the last morning in Elena's small room, and with it came the sound of organized chaos. Footsteps echoed through the servants' quarters, doors opening and closing, Victoria's voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Every room," she commanded. "Check every closet, every corner, under every bed. He's here somewhere, and I'm done playing games." Elena and Alexander sat on the narrow bed, their hands clasped, listening to the search drawing closer. They had barely slept, spending the night talking in whispers, making plans that seemed more desperate with each passing hour. Marcus Chun had sent word that extraction was arranged for noon, but Victoria's search would reach them long before then. "I should face her," Alexander said quietly. "I should walk out there, confront her directly. Maybe If you walk out there, her men will grab you immediately, Elena interrupted. They'll drug you, take you somewhere, and by the time anyone realizes what happened, Victoria will have control of everything. We have to wait for Marcus. And risk you. Alexander shook his head. Elena, when they find me here, in your room, Victoria will destroy you. She'll have you arrested for kidnapping, or worse. Let her try, Elena said with a fierce determination that made Alexander's heart ache. I'm not afraid of her. But she was afraid. Alexander could see it in the trembling of her hands, the paleness of her face. She was terrified, but she was choosing courage anyway. That's what bravery really was, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The search drew closer. They could hear Victoria's heels clicking against the old wooden floors, hear her interrogating each servant, who tried to explain their room was empty, contained nothing unusual. Check anyway, Victoria snapped each time. Open every door. Leave nothing unsearched. Elena stood and moved to the door, her back straight, her chin lifted. When she gets here, she said quietly, let me speak first. Please, Alexander. Trust me. Before Alexander could argue, footsteps stopped outside Elena's door. The handle rattled. Then came a sharp knock. This is Miss Ashworth. Open this door immediately. Elena took a deep breath and opened the door. Victoria stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards and 3 of her hired men. Her eyes were cold, calculating, until they landed on Alexander sitting on the bed behind Elena. Then her expression transformed into something triumphant and terrible. Alexander, she purred, her voice dripping with false concern. Thank God we found you. We've been so worried. You've clearly been under enormous stress, not thinking clearly. She gestured to the men behind her. Let's get you to the hospital where you can rest, where we can take care of you properly. I'm not going anywhere with you, Alexander said, standing. His voice was steady, stronger than Elena had ever heard it. I'm not sick, Victoria. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm making the clearest decision I've made in years. Victoria's mask of concern slipped. Don't be ridiculous. You've been held here against your will by this servant who clearly doesn't understand the trouble she's caused. Kidnapping is a serious crime. I wasn't kidnapped, Alexander said firmly. Elena saved my life when you sent men to drug me and take me. She protected me when you were planning to have me declared incompetent so you could steal everything I own. I've been hiding from you, Victoria, because you're the real threat. That's absurd. Victoria laughed, but her eyes were flashing with anger. You're delusional, stressed, clearly influenced by someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. Guards, please escort Mr. Sinclair to the car. Gently, of course. He's not well. The men moved forward, but Elena stepped directly into their path. At 5'4" and barely 120 pounds, she should have been easily pushed aside. But something in her stance, in her fierce expression, made them hesitate. You'll have to go through me first, Elena said quietly. And if you touch him, if you try to take him, I'll scream loud enough for everyone in this estate to hear. Every servant, every guard, every person you've been lying to. I'll tell them everything. About your blackmail, about your threats, about your plan to kidnap him. No one will believe a maid over me, Victoria sneered. You're nothing. You're invisible. People like you don't matter in our world. Maybe not in your world, a new voice said from the hallway. Everyone turned to see Marcus Chun, Alexander's attorney, standing behind Victoria's men with 2 police officers and a woman in a business suit. But in the real world, where laws matter and truth matters, people like Elena are exactly who we believe. Victoria's face went pale. Marcus, what are you doing here? I'm doing my job, which is protecting my client from fraud, extortion, and attempted kidnapping, Marcus replied calmly. He nodded to the police officers. These officers have warrants for your arrest, Miss Ashworth, based on evidence Mr. Sinclair provided, including recordings of your threats and documentation of your blackmail attempts. This is ridiculous, Victoria sputtered. I'm his fiancée. I was trying to help him. You were trying to rob him, Marcus interrupted. And you attempted to have him kidnapped when he wanted to back out of the wedding. The 3 men you hired have already been arrested and have given full statements. Your plan is over, Victoria. The police officers moved forward, and for a moment, Victoria's composed mask completely shattered. She looked at Alexander with pure hatred. You'll regret this, she hissed. I'll fight this in court. I'll destroy your reputation, your company. No, you won't, Marcus said firmly. Because if you try, we'll release everything. The recordings, the documents, the evidence of your conspiracy. You can walk away now with some dignity intact, or you can fight and lose everything publicly. Your choice. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with one final poisonous look at Alexander and Elena, she turned and walked away, flanked by the police officers. When she was gone, the tension that had filled the tiny room for 3 days finally broke. Alexander's knees buckled, and Elena caught him, both of them sinking to the floor, holding each other as the adrenaline and fear finally released its grip. It's over, Elena whispered. It's really over. Marcus chin cleared his throat from the doorway. Not quite. We have some legal matters to address, paperwork to file. But yes, the immediate danger has passed. He looked at Elena with respect. Miss Martinez, your courage in protecting Mr. Sinclair, despite the personal risk, is extraordinary. Alexander is very fortunate to have someone like you in his life. I'm the fortunate one, Alexander said, looking at Elena with wonder. She saved me in every way a person can be saved. As the police and attorneys dealt with the aftermath, as servants gathered in the hallways whispering about what had happened, Alexander and Elena remained in the small room that had been their sanctuary. 3 days in a space barely big enough for 2 people, 3 days that had changed everything. What happens now? Elena asked softly. Alexander pulled her closer. Now we figure out what comes next. Together. If you'll have me. You're a billionaire, Elena said, but she was smiling. I'm a maid without papers, without education, without anything to offer you. You're wrong, Alexander said. You offered me everything that matters. You offered me truth, courage, compassion, and love. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You saved my life, Elena. Not just from Victoria, but from a lifetime of emptiness. He touched her face gently. I don't know what comes next. I don't know how we navigate the differences between our worlds.
But I know I want to try.
I know that these 3 days in this tiny room have been more real, more valuable, more meaningful than years of my privileged life. Will you take a chance with me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of what you did for me? Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes, she whispered. Yes. In that small servant's room where they had hidden from danger, where they had discovered each other against all odds, they held each other as the morning light streamed through the single window. Outside, the world was changing, questions were being asked, challenges were arising. But inside that tiny space, 2 people from impossible worlds had found something rare and precious, a love built not on status or wealth, but on courage, sacrifice, and the profound recognition of each other's humanity. The confrontation was over, but their story was just beginning. 3 months later, the small servant's room in Sinclair Manor stood empty. The narrow bed was made with fresh linens, The single window was clean. The few possessions Elena had left behind had been carefully packed and moved. But the room itself had become something of a legend among the staff, a place where something impossible had happened, where two worlds had collided and created something beautiful. Elena stood in the doorway, looking at the space that had changed her life. She was dressed differently now, not in a maid's uniform, but in a simple dress that Alexander had bought her, though she had insisted it shouldn't be too expensive. Old habits were hard to break. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, both of them looking at the tiny room that had saved them. "I can't believe it's real," Elena whispered. "Sometimes I think I'll wake up and still be here, cleaning rooms, invisible." "You were never invisible to me," Alexander said. "Not after that night. Never again." The truth about what had happened in those 3 days had shocked everyone. The story had spread through the manor first, whispered among servants who had never imagined that one of their own would save the master of the house. Then it had spread beyond the estate, picked up by newspapers and news channels fascinated by the dramatic tale. "Billionaire saved by Maid," the headlines read. "Housekeeper hides heir from kidnapping plot," announced another. The media had fallen in love with the story. The wealthy man trapped by a greedy fiancé, saved by a brave young woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose. But those headlines didn't capture the real truth. They didn't understand what had happened in that small room, the connection that had formed between two people when everything else was stripped away. They didn't know about the long conversations in whispers, about the fear and courage, about the moment when privilege and poverty had met and recognized each other's humanity. Victoria's arrest had made even bigger headlines. The evidence Marcus Chun had gathered, combined with statements from the men she had hired, had built an ironclad case. She was facing charges of attempted kidnapping, extortion, and fraud. Her wealthy family had disowned her, her social circle had abandoned her, and she was fighting a losing legal battle while the world watched her fall from grace. Alexander had called off the wedding immediately, of course. But the bigger shock came when he announced, 6 weeks after the rescue, that he was pursuing a relationship with Elena Martinez, the maid who had saved him. The backlash had been immediate and vicious. Society pages questioned his sanity. Business partners worried about his judgment. Friends from his old life whispered that he was making a mistake, that gratitude wasn't love, that he was throwing away his status for someone inappropriate. But Alexander had learned something in that tiny room. The opinions of people who had never truly seen him didn't matter. What mattered was truth, courage, and love, qualities Elena had in abundance and his former friends lacked entirely. "Mr. Sinclair?" Mrs. Chun, the head housekeeper who had covered for Elena during those dangerous days, appeared in the hallway. "The car is ready whenever you're prepared to leave." "Thank you, Mrs. Chun," Alexander said. Then, with a warmth that would have shocked his former self, he added, "And thank you for protecting Elena when she needed it. Your courage helped save my life." Mrs. Chen's eyes grew moist. "She's special, that one. I knew it from the day I hired her. She deserved protection, deserved better than to be invisible." She smiled at Elena. "I'm glad you finally see yourself the way others see you." Elena hugged the older woman, saying goodbye to someone who had been more than a boss, who had been a guardian when it mattered most. They walked through the manor together, Alexander and Elena, past the grand rooms where he had lived his privileged life, past the servants' passages where she had worked in obscurity. Staff members stopped to wish them well, their faces showing genuine happiness. For once, the divide between upstairs and downstairs had been bridged, and everyone could celebrate it. Outside, a car waited to take them to the airport. Alexander had made decisions in the past 3 months that had shocked everyone who thought they knew him. He had restructured his company, putting in place a management team he trusted, stepping back from day-to-day operations. He had established a foundation dedicated to helping undocumented workers and their families, ensuring others like Elena would have access to legal help and medical care. He had made it his mission to use his privilege to lift others up rather than maintain the walls between classes. And he had announced that he and Elena were leaving, at least for a while. They were going to Mexico to see Elena's mother, to be there for her in person, to ensure she had the best possible care. After that, they would travel, explore, figure out what they wanted from life when freed from the expectations others had placed on them. "Are you scared?" Elena asked as they settled into the car. "About leaving everything behind, about facing what people will say about us?" Alexander took her hand, remembering 3 days in a tiny room where they had faced much worse than gossip. "No," he said honestly. "The only time I was truly scared was when I thought I might lose you before I even really knew you. Everything else is manageable." The car pulled away from Sinclair Manor, and Elena looked back at the massive estate, at the servants' wing where her tiny room was located. She thought about the person she had been 3 months ago, invisible, struggling, convinced that her life would never be more than service to others more fortunate than herself. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked. "I'm thinking about that night," Elena said softly. "When I heard Victoria threaten you, when I saw those men coming for you, I had a choice. I could have stayed invisible, stayed safe, convinced myself it wasn't my problem. No one would have blamed me. But something in me couldn't walk away. Couldn't let injustice happen when I had the power to stop it, even if that power was just knowing the hidden passages and having a room where someone could hide." "You saved my life," Alexander said. "And you saved mine," Elena replied, turning to face him. "You saw me, Alexander. You saw me when I had spent years being invisible. You valued my courage, my compassion, my humanity, when all I had to offer was a tiny room and a willingness to risk everything. You taught me that I matter, that my life has value beyond service, beyond sacrifice. You gave me freedom too." They kissed, and in that moment, the truth that shocked everyone became clear. This wasn't a fairy tale about a rich man and a poor girl. It wasn't about rescue or gratitude or crossing class lines. It was about 2 human beings who had been trapped in different ways, one by wealth and expectations, one by poverty and invisibility, who had found each other in the most unlikely place and recognized something essential, that every person, regardless of their status or circumstances, deserves to be seen, valued, and loved for who they truly are. As the car drove them toward a new life, Elena thought about the small room that had changed everything. It would remain in the servants' wing of Sinclair Manor, a tiny space with a narrow bed and a single window. But it would never be just a servant's quarters again. It was the place where walls came down, where truth emerged, where love bloomed against impossible odds. It was the place where a maid locked a billionaire in her room to save him, and in doing so, saved them both. 6 months later, the wedding took place, not in a grand cathedral with society photographers, but in Elena's village in Mexico, surrounded by her community and her healed mother. Alexander wore a simple suit. Elena wore a dress her mother had sewn. There were no headlines this time, no society pages documenting the event. Just 2 people who had survived darkness together, promising to face whatever came next with the same courage they had found in a tiny room during 3 impossible days. The truth that shocked everyone wasn't that a billionaire fell for a maid. The truth was simpler and more profound, that love doesn't calculate worth in dollars or status, that courage is found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest room in the largest house can contain more truth and beauty than all the grand halls combined. Elena and Alexander had learned what really matters in life. Not what you own, but who you are and who you choose to be when everything is stripped away. They had found each other in hiding, in fear, in a space barely big enough for hope. And from that tiny room, they had built a life bigger and more meaningful than either could have imagined. The small servants' quarters at Sinclair Manor stands empty now, but never forgotten. It remains a testament to an impossible truth that the most valuable things in life, courage, compassion, genuine love, can't be bought with money or inherited with privilege. They can only be chosen, offered freely, recognized when they appear in unexpected places. And sometimes, just sometimes, those valuable things appear in a small room with a narrow bed and a single window where a maid once locked a billionaire inside to save him, and in doing so, discovered that they were both capable of saving each other. That's the truth that shocked everyone. And that's the truth that changed two lives forever.
The end.